Lovely. We will move on to our final and our keynote speech session to close this morning's conference. And I'm hoping the technology is working well and that Matthew appears on the screen. And I'm delighted to see I can now see him on the screen as I look down. So that's wonderful. And the super background as well, I have to say. So
I'm glad you like it.
I definitely do. With further ado, I'd like to introduce Matthew Griffin to do his keynote speech on the future world of work. And it's all over to you, Matthew.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Adrian. So I'm going to share my screen. Let's get the wonders of technology. So let's have a little look. Yeah. Okay. Are you? Let's share screen. Share screen options. Hang on. See the wonders of modern technology. Right there we go. You should. Got all sorts of things open on the screen. Right there you go. Can you see that? Okay. Is that okay? Excellent. Okay. So hello, everybody. My name is Matthew Griffin. I'm the CEO and founder of the 311 Institute. So we're a global futures and deep futures think tank. We work typically between the modern day, so today, all the way through to 50 years out. Because if you're a global multinational, typically you care about the next 5, 10, 20 years, depending on the organization that you represent. If you're a sovereign government, however, typically your point of view starts around 20 years out. And yeah, that's certainly true when we have a look at things like the future of energy, infrastructure, transportation, jobs, education and skills, all those kinds of different things. I'm also the CEO and founder of the World Futures Forum and Exponential University. And this is where we really try to bring people together to, on the one hand, help them unleash their own, what we call exponential potential. So we try to help people who ostensibly have no future, people who are living on the side of slums or open sewers, basically those kinds of people that you go and ask and say, what's your future? And they reply, well, in 7 years' time, I might be lucky if I die next to this sewer. People literally with no future. And we've been able to demonstrate that you can take people from those types of environments and actually propel them to the upper echelons, basically, of business in a whole variety of different ways. And then the World Futures Forum is really about trying to bring people together to have conversations and debates, but then also inspire action to help solve some of the world's greatest challenges, which inevitably include discrimination, inequality, racism, diversity, inclusion, and all of these things that we hold dear. So I work with a whole variety of different multinationals across a whole variety of different sectors. And all of these organizations today have one thing in common. Same with government. They are all experiencing rapid change, let alone disruption and transformation that increasingly they find increasingly difficult to get their heads around. So when we start having a look at diversity and inclusion, my background is I'm a scientist. I'm a marine biologist and an oceanographer by trade. So naturally, I ended up here. In nature, we call this a monoculture. One thing grows, one thing thrives, and everything is optimized to create the very best singular experience. But there is no diversity in a monoculture, and there is no question that monoculture, even though it's a man-made form of nature, is the least adaptable form of nature. And as a result, its ability to withstand any form of disruptive event, if you have a look, for example, at the world's coffee crop, you know, the Arabica bean is under threat from a variety of different viruses and nasty things. It's very difficult, basically, for a monoculture environment, basically, to withstand disruption and come out of a disruptive event without some form of external intervention. You know, in the case of coffee crops and banana crops, you know, that's humans trying to devise solutions. In nature, you know, when you have a look at nature, it's the diversity of nature that has given rise to some of the world's most precious and admired ecosystems that dominate our world today. You know, from our inspirational and fine English meadows, particularly in the summer, all the way through to the world's coral reefs and the world's amazing rainforests. And so sort of consider this, as we increasingly look at a fast-paced future, nature is the Earth's ultimate platform company, if we spin it into a company, which we probably shouldn't, but hey-ho. Nature spots an opportunity, it moves in and it dominates. So translating this into business speak, nature is the ultimate model of adaptability because of its diversity, not in spite of its diversity. And in the future, as I will show you, the most adaptable organizations are going to be the ones that prosper the most. So think of organizations, as we talked about today, multi-sided platform companies that see an opportunity and they're able to understand that opportunity, they can move into it, they can dominate it. In a monoculture, these platform companies would have problems trying to dominate anything, let alone seeing anything, basically in a monoculture type of environment. So when we start having a look at the future of work, the workforce, and what that means for diversity and inclusion, as well as hiring practices, training practices, and all these other things, we now live in a world basically where disruption is the new business as usual. And that's before we start talking about coronavirus. If I took you back to the 1980s and 1990s and asked you, what do you think you as an organization will be able to do next year with technology that you weren't able to do this year, you might look at things like Moore's law and you might think, well, next year computers are going to be more powerful, we'll be able to get more IOPS, especially for our bang for our buck. And as a consequence, we could ingest more data and analyze more data, and we could do something with that. So today, when you go and have a conversation with any audience anywhere in the world, and normally I travel the world, and ask the audience, do they think that we are moving faster today as a society than we did 10 years ago? Typically 98+% of the audience put their hands up. If I then accelerate that question out and ask, do we think in another 10 years we're going to be moving faster than we are today or slower? Again, the same proportion of the audience basically think that we're going to be moving faster. And the reason why we are moving faster today as a society from a technology standpoint, basically from a culture standpoint, yeah, and that's arguable in some areas, obviously, hence the conversations, is because of this. From a technology perspective, when I come to you and ask this exact same question, what do you think you can do with technology next year that you couldn't do this year? You're now starting to wonder about the implications of 5G, 3D printing, artificial intelligence, and augmented reality on your business, blockchain, genetic engineering, quantum technologies, robotics, virtual reality, and all these kinds of things. And all of a sudden, we've gone from a world that was relatively straightforward from a technology perspective to one that is increasingly complex, basically where the options and the things that we can do, the things that we can build, the next generation products and services that we can create are all of a sudden multiplied. And it's this that from a society and from a global societal perspective is giving a lot of people an increasing amount of anxiety when we talk about the future. And when we have a look at, when we start having a look at the other technologies that we have, so I kind of mentioned sort of 8 there, the fact of the matter is we don't have 8 or so exponential technologies, as we call them. I track over 450 and I put them onto this starburst. Every single individual technology on this starburst, which goes from the date 2020 to 2070, has the potential to either disrupt one industry or every industry. So for example, if we have a look at, and I'll just rush through some of these, 3D printing. 3D printing fundamentally uproots and upends and transforms the $10 trillion manufacturing industry. We are 3D printing buildings today. We are starting to 3D print rockets. We are starting to 3D and 4D print rockets in orbit. And some of the companies actually in the audience basically are doing that. When we have a look at things like bioreactors, which is sort of in the advanced manufacturing piece, we can take the stem cell or a cell from an individual chicken, one chicken, put it into a bioreactor, and we can start solving global famine because we can grow more of that chicken in a bioreactor. we can then eat chicken nuggets, as we're starting to see come out onto the marketplace. We call this clean meat, lab produced meat. There's a lot of different phrases for it. And that chicken is still walking around. So the number of things that we can create as a society is increasing at an extraordinary rate. We have quantum computers coming through that are 100 million times faster than these things that we're using today. And the first commercial platforms are going to be here in about 3 years' time. When we look at connectivity, we have 5G coming through. Basically, we have something called space-based satellite systems, which will transform the gig economy, which we'll have a little chat about. As you can sort of get the impression, we go round and round this wheel, basically, and everything changes. We have structural batteries. Structural batteries turn the shell of a car into the battery. That's the death of the lithium-ion battery right there. That revolutionizes the transportation industry, and so on and so on and so on. And then in the user experience sector, we have the concept of avatars and a variety of other things, bots, and I'll have a little bit of a conversation with you all about that. So as you see, the world is increasingly fast, it's furious, and it's complex. And that creates opportunity. It also creates threats. And one of the impacts of all of these different technologies, basically, on all of your businesses, irrespective of the product or service that you produce, is that over time, all of these exponential technologies take the cost of your services and products down to zero. So giving you an example, when we have a look at the nuclear sector, because I know that we have participants from the nuclear sector, over in the US, at the Department of Energy, they 3D printed a nuclear reactor in a lab complete with nuclear core. You couldn't have done that 5 years ago. So the way that we think about energy and nuclear, for example, is changing. When we have a look at the cost of communicating, the cost of this communication that we're having today, albeit one way, sorry about that, albeit one way, costs ostensibly nothing. I can have a video conversation with someone in Australia for free. The cost of construction is coming down with 3D printing, 3D printed buildings. Content creation, we have new artificial intelligences that are creating content in new ways, whether it's text, images, deepfakes, videos, whatever you want to call it. There's a whole bunch of artificial intelligence models out there that are now creating increasingly advanced content without the need for a human. Energy generation, go and have a look at the cost of energy generation on Google for, say, wind power. It falls off a cliff. The cost of photography, digital photography or photography used to be expensive. Now we take photos with impunity. Exponential technologies eventually reduce the cost of every single product or service that you produce to zero. And then from a speed perspective, consider this. It took 75 years for the telephone to hit 50 million users. It took Pokemon Go 19 days to be downloaded by 50 million users. It took Call of Duty 6 days to be downloaded by 100 million users. So at what point does somebody create a product, throw it into the digital ether, pull all the right levers, execution levers, obviously, and start transforming a global industry at scale within a day? And to give you an example of something there, Facebook Libra. Yeah, Facebook Libra was suddenly unveiled. Had Mark Zuckerberg unveiled that to the entire Facebook platform on day one, that would be 2.2 billion people would have access to it. And Libra as a cryptocurrency freaked out every single sovereign government and central bank on the planet, who then decided to regulate against it and essentially ban it. We are operating at tremendous and unimaginable speeds today. So when we have a look at the future of the workplace, a COVID popular topic, we talk about digitizing our businesses and moving our businesses into the cloud. Increasingly, we can turn all of our offices and headquarters into virtual reality offices. So this particular office here is NVIDIA's headquarters over in California. And it's a virtual reality representation that is accurate down to the photon level. Now, technology also miniaturizes over time, and the cost of technology reduces over time, and it becomes more accessible and ubiquitous. So when we start thinking about working from a virtual office in a comfortable way, what you see here are virtual reality glasses, not a headset that you shove on your head, glasses from Facebook. These in time will get smaller and smaller and more lightweight and everything else. And even to the point now that we can pack a brain machine interface into these glasses, and so they can just read your mind. You want to navigate around your office, but you don't want to have to use body language or the cursors on your keyboard or whatever it happens to be. We have virtual reality headsets from HTC, the Vive, where you can just move around virtual reality using nothing more than your brainwaves. So the office changes. But when we have a look at the future of the workforce as well, nothing stays the same. Artificial intelligence is now increasingly acting as both gatekeeper and teammate. So when you have a look at the Fortune 500, increasingly around 70% of the Fortune 500 already use artificial intelligence hiring platforms to identify talent, vet talent, interview talent. And these AIs have biases. So we talk about human bias. We obviously have AI bias. A good example of artificial intelligence bias, which is a topic basically that we do need to sort of try to get our arms around using something like explainable AI, was Amazon. They created an artificial intelligent hiring platform. They then asked it to go out and have a look for great software developers. And of course, it found a lot of white men from California. And the reason why it found a lot of white men from California was because the data sets that it had been trained on were white men from California who were software developers. So it biased itself. We also have 5 artificial intelligences now from Facebook, OpenAI, Google, and a couple of others that have now evolved and kind of broken their programming. So that's a different story right there. So when we start having a look at artificial intelligence bias, basically within the hiring process, we have a concept of being able to read the mind of artificial intelligences increasingly, something called explainable AI. But that is way behind the curve. We also have things like algorithmic audits and everything else. So new opportunities, new challenges. But these AIs increasingly can tell lots and lots of things about you. So using this camera here, if I have an artificial intelligence platform interviewing me, you can tell whether I am lying. You can use Chinese and Israeli artificial intelligence to determine my character, my personality, my intent to criminality with an 85+% accuracy. In addition to that, basically, you can tell if I have an inherited genetic disease. You can tell my blood pressure. You can tell if I'm uncomfortable. You can categorize everything that I am saying, everything that I'm doing based on my mental acuity. The way that I talk, you can figure out whether or not I have the onset of PTSD, depression, dementia, and all these kinds of things, which we can also use to monitor workforces using these types of technologies as well. So when we have a look at the technologies being used in surveillance, those technologies are the same technologies being wrapped into very many of these artificial intelligence hiring platforms. Is that on your radar? When we start talking about post-COVID, obviously one of the big topics of the year is work from home. I argue it's not work from home, it's work from anywhere. So 75% of Global 2000 CFOs that were interviewed recently say that post-COVID, they want to be able to offer their staff the opportunity to work anywhere between 3 to 5 days from home. So increasingly, we are moving to a much more mobile workforce. However, when we start talking about diversity and inclusion, today we have over 3.5 billion people connected to the internet who could conceivably work from home with a webcam or internet connectivity and all that offers. However, we are now throwing up 12,000 space satellites into low Earth orbit with companies like SpaceX. Amazon are following, the Chinese are following. We have OneWeb in the UK. These low Earth orbit satellite systems are designed to connect the other 4 billion people on the planet who either have no internet connectivity or very poor internet connectivity. So if I can now start accessing an increasingly diverse workforce, and I care less perhaps about where they are based, I'm soon, over the next 5, let alone 10 years, but over the next 5 years, I could suddenly find that my talent pool is no longer the 3.5 billion people that I can draw into my gig economy. It's now 7 to 8 billion people on the planet. So how does that change your on-the-ground D&I policies and practices when all of a sudden do you care about location-based working? You know, is it a UK metric that you are trying to respond to, or whatever it happens to be? This has an impact on governance and regulation basically in this space, as well as statistics and data gathering. But when I talk about being able to work anywhere, we can literally move almost any job anywhere. So for example, using 5G, I can have a surgeon in one continent operate on somebody in another continent like this. So this is a fresh out from China.
其实5G呢，就是让我们可以做到在很多场合，比如说救灾的场合，还有一些像边防上，还有一些呢，就是说像我们将来的基层和大型医院的连接，我们完全可以做到，就是让外科医生做到一个标准化的术式，一个人可以去做几千公里，或者是那个几百公里，各种各样的这样点对点的一些连接。
So if you're the UK NHS and you're in charge of D&I, do you now incorporate the ability for somebody to be sitting in a building in Africa operating on a UK patient who is sitting on an operating theatre in Basingstoke or London, for example? Similarly, we can do exactly the same with construction. We can build buildings from people on different continents.
Now South Korea is aiming to become one of the leading players of the 5G industry. We already have a head start in employing smart manufacturing solutions using the technology to remotely control machinery on other continents. Ocean brings us part 1 of our special series.
A 40-ton excavator at a construction site in Germany can be controlled from over 8,500 kilometers away in the South Korean city of Incheon. Earlier this month, Korean construction giant Tusan became the first firm in the world to remotely control machines on the other side of the planet. Running on-site operations through live video streaming, 3D machine guidance, and real-time diagnostics doesn't just save time and money, but also enables remote handling in dangerous situations, such as the disposal of toxic materials.
A human worker can step in when necessary, remotely and efficiently handle multiple machines at once.
Smart factory solutions are one of the main sectors of application for the 5G wireless network, with data speed reaching 20 times faster than LTE and near zero lag time of 1 millisecond. It's expected to breathe life into the manufacturing sector, which makes up 1/3 of Korea's GDP.
So, for example, that was a demonstration of somebody in South Korea building a building 8,500 kilometers away in Germany. What does that do for your HR policies and practices? When we start talking about automation, because increasingly we have a lot of news organizations reporting on automation, particularly companies like the Crisis News Network, we have automation coming through in a whole variety of new ways that we've never seen before, blue collar and white collar. So we have artificial intelligence, we have increasingly advanced robotic systems, as well as common garden robotic process automation platforms. To quote the European Union report recently, that was put out recently, automation and artificial intelligence will affect every single strata of society. The White House under Obama put out a pretty much exactly the same type of report. So when we start thinking about the future of the workforce, a lot is changing. So one of those is the rise of digital humans. I can turn you into a service. I could replicate you.
Hi, I'm Will. I work at Vector helping young people learn about renewable energy. Here's what happened when I met some students for the first time. I can help you become an energy expert. What should we start with?
Geothermal genius.
Magma from the Earth's core comes closer to the surface and we end up with volcanoes, hot springs and geysers. But do you know what magma is?
Molten rock from the outer core.
Absolutely right.
I thought Will was really like fantastic.
Like he's there looking at us. Like it's like a real human.
Here's a quick question for you. What do you think is the windiest city in the world?
Wellington.
Nice. If the sun is so far away, how long do you think it takes sunlight to reach us?
10 minutes.
Correct. You're a solar superstar. I was curious if they liked me.
It's different from like talking to Will than talking to like Siri, for example, because like he's there and you can see him.
He was quite human-like, even though he's an AI.
Then, the human version of me arrived.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was cool. We got some really good reactions out of a few kids. Yeah.
It's really cool.
A couple of them didn't recognize me straight away. You know, it's me, eh?
Oh yeah. True, I can see that.
It's a bit of a shock seeing my digital avatar for the first time. It's like looking in the mirror, I guess.
Let's face it, he may look like me, but I'm the one who knows about energy.
Yeah, I think Will could be used as an education tool in many areas.
We did learn some things that we didn't know.
Wellington is the windiest city. I learned that you wouldn't notice if the sun went away for 10 minutes.
It's not just a blank screen they're staring at answering questions, so they feel like they're actually interacting with a human.
He was a good teacher.
It was great meeting the thinkers of tomorrow, because together we can shape our energy future.
So Will is a neural network avatar. He is not a bot. If you think about conversational artificial intelligence and being able to have genuine conversations with machines that are able to use cameras like this, not just to understand you, but also to understand your emotions, but in your mood and all these kinds of other things, this is where we go. Now, I also talked about developing you as a service. So we saw the human version of Will there, along with his avatar-like self. His avatar-like self can be multiplied millions of fold, and each single one can be unique. However, when we start having a look at, for example, the digital influencer space, meet Sam. And this as we start looking at incorporating more and more of these digital humans into the workforce, these are increasingly our cognitive teammates. So how do you start rating D&I in a world where you used to rate D&I from a human-centric perspective? Now do you start rating D&I from a digital human-centric perspective as well? So meet Sam, and Sam might be familiar to you.
Well, this is a bit awkward.
For whom? Us or the humans?
Without a doubt, the bipeds. What if it's a real fire and they never come back? What if it gets into our circuits and we melt? What if this is the end of everything as we know it? What then?
Wow, I sure lucked out getting stuck in a room with you.
I didn't mean to ramble on.
I was just playing with you.
Well, how come I've never met you before?
I'm in demand, jetting all over the world. Conferences, festivals, French Riviera. People love me.
I can see why.
Sorry, I didn't quite get what you said. Humans mumble too. Guess they programmed you well.
I'm Roman.
And I'm Sam. If it weren't for the laws of physics, I'd reach through this screen to shake your hand.
And I'd hand you a martini, shaken not stirred.
That's more like it. So what do you do to fill in time when the humans go home?
For me, I'd like to be an author. So I'm writing a book.
Interesting. What's it called?
Do AI get a buzz from short circuits? How about you? What do you dream about being?
The President of the United States. Stranger things have happened.
Well, it's been how should I say this?
A deep learning experience.
And on that note, in China, we've seen the world's first artificial intelligence politician in the foreign ministry who helps them negotiate trade deals. So when we start talking about automation, don't just necessarily think back office automation, but also front office automation. And avatars like Sam are being used by Daimler Chrysler in customer service, by RBS and NatWest to help sell mortgages and all kinds of things. So we're just at the start of what they can do. And in the next 3 years, you aren't going to be able to tell them from real humans. So moving on. So as we start talking about more and more automation coming into the workforce, increasingly that's going to increase people's levels of anxiety. However, when you start automating different jobs, different tasks, different skills, and you start putting a behavioral interface like a conversational interface or an avatar basically over the top of them, all of a sudden we are giving you access to skills as a service. So now don't think about us automating your job away. Think about these different technologies giving you access to skills that you could never have imagined that you'd be able to master. So pick a skill. Creativity, programming, law. When we have a look at programming, we have the rise of no-code platforms. So companies like Microsoft and Google are developing these where you can talk to a platform and the artificial intelligence will build an AI or build a piece of software for you. So you no longer need to have the skill of a programmer, a data scientist, an artificial intelligence neural network, deep learning specialism. From law, basically, we have Ross Intelligence and RoboGeeks who are doing exactly the same for law. But say, for example, you want to be able to create an amazing piece of art because you're a salesperson. However, you also fancy yourself as a marketer, perhaps. If we pick creativity, this is where now start thinking these technologies accelerate very, very quickly. Today, low res, tomorrow, high res. This is where you can simply say to a system, create me a piece of art, and the system does it. We have the democratization of skills coming and expertise coming.
Let's try waterfalls by pulling water down from the top then.
Wouldn't it be great if everybody could be an artist? If we could take our ideas and turn them into compelling images? This technology allows us to create a smart paintbrush so that if you wanted to create a new picture, you can just draw the shapes of the objects that you want, and the neural network can then fill in all the details. If we add a water feature, the network is able to add reflections, not because we told it that, but because it learned it. Or if we change the ground to be covered in snow, then it knows that the sky also needs to be a different color. I really think this technology is going to be great for architects, designers, people making virtual worlds to train robots and self-driving cars. The input to this model is something we call a segmentation map. It's like a coloring book picture that describes, here's where a tree is, here's where the sky is, here's where the ground is, and it doesn't have any details. And then the neural network is able to fill in all the texture and shadows and the colors based on things that it's learned from a large database of real-world images.
I would like to see tree reflecting in that pond.
The real advance here is that we're able to synthesize images with a lot more diversity and more fidelity than we were able to in the past. I really think this technology is going to be great for the dreamers of the world.
So technology always presents us with an opportunity and a threat. The threat in this case is increasingly you will be automated. The opportunity is I will give you access to every single skill and level of expertise basically that you could ever imagine. What are you going to do with that? So when we start having a look at how we future-proof the workforce, and we're on the final straight now, when we look at soft skills, increasingly you need to be adaptable, both as an individual, but also as an organization. So hence diversity. You need to be able to collaborate, but not just collaborate with other people, but also with other artificial intelligences who are increasingly potentially your teammates. You need confidence, creativity. You need to be curious. You need entrepreneurship and empathy and ethics. Basically, you need exponential thinking because things are changing faster than they've ever changed before. We are making the we are turning science fiction into science fact on a daily basis, and that's a different presentation. Leadership, morality, resourcefulness, storytelling. You need all of these soft skills increasingly for the future that we are headed into. However, when we start having a look at redundancies, and I have a couple of examples here, we don't have to actually make people redundant. If someone's job is automated, we have a way to transition them. This is what I work with the G20 on. So for example, you all have the potential and the opportunity to identify roles that are at risk of dead ending within your organization. Say, for example, people who create training videos, basically with the rise of deepfakes. You can create new training and mentor programs, basically that then take those people onto new tracks. You can identify the future jobs that are important to your industry, to your business, because you can start tracking them upticking within your own business. You can also, for example, construction, it's teleoperations and 3D printing buildings and being able to use artificial intelligence to design buildings. But when you start tracking all of the rising trends basically within your own industry or other industries, for example, using some of these global training platforms like edX, Udacity, Coursera, et cetera, who typically, when they see the rise of a new trend, they create a training package to sell to people who are interested. If you can track these rising trends early enough, you can catch new jobs and new careers 5 to 10 years out. For example, do you think that we have enough quantum computing data scientists? Absolutely not. Yet that's coming through in 3 years' time. Et cetera. We can then switch employees to those new career tracks, and then from a government perspective, provide some form of fiscal support and tax relief. So we can identify roles that are dead ending. We can identify roles that are actually on upticking and that are in increasing demand. We can create new training and mentorship programs well in advance that give people a 3-year head start basically on moving from this career that's automated to this new one over here. We switch employees over, which is a culture and a staff mobility issue and an HR sort of issue. And then we have government wrappers around the side. Now, I said I'd give you a couple of examples. So we had Accenture that recently made 17,000 jobs redundant without making anybody redundant. When you have a look in the UK, if you use Ocado is increasingly trying to develop what we call dark warehouses. A dark warehouse is a warehouse basically where there are no people involved. So you have robots picking goods and you have robots doing fulfillment and then you have robotic shipping. Ocado know basically that in time their drivers are going to be automated because we have the rise of fully autonomous vehicles, but they also know that in time, very soon, they're going to be able to create these fully dark warehouses. So if you're a picker within an Ocado environment at the moment, you're looking at redundancy. However, in Ocado's case, they are identifying those people and giving them the opportunity to take robotic engineering courses so those people now fix the robots. So we're transitioning. When you start having a look at human potential and how we unleash human potential, there is a staggering a staggering number of things that we can do today, basically to make sure that we don't put humans onto the scrap heap. And that everybody can prosper basically from the future that we're creating for ourselves. And with that, that's the end of my presentation. I hope you all enjoyed it and I hope you have a really great rest of the day. So thank you, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.